to cross you over to an event which is happening right now, where IMANI is holding a forum on some happenings to the Ghanaian economy. Obviously, there's a lot for you to learn from this engagement. We can just cross you live now to that venue grounds where a lot of engagements are happening.
Hello. Thank you very much, Sami. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to this. We are welcoming you to this last dialogue, which we have themed the Reform Dialogue series together with our partner, the GIZ. When we started this collaboration almost 2 years ago, we were very much sure that the subjects we focused on, almost 9 or so subjects, were crucial to the sustenance of this economy. We never thought we would ever get to an IMF program. We never thought we would be going to the IMF pretty soon, because the conversations we had were quite rich and it involved government officials as well. But here we are, and we think that this last conversation, which is the 9th of the series, in the series, will be dedicated to a subject, obviously, which is quite important to essentially taking us back to the path of progress. And we thought that these two focal areas are going to be very important for the next, if you like, reinvigorating of the economy. So thank you very much for coming, and let me thank our partner GIZ as well, and Richard and Donald are here. I'm sure they'll have a few words for us as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kucho. Welcome from GIZ. For those of you who don't know GIZ, we are Germany's bilateral technical cooperation arm. We have jointly created this Reform Dialogue series together with IMANI, a very good partner over the past 2 years. Unfortunately, this will be the last session for this year. Next year, let's see, but at least I can say for sure, this year it will be last debate. Doesn't mean that in the future we might have to find another form of cooperation, but not with our project, because our project, which is called the Reform Investment Partnership Project, will phase out this year. But as you know, GIZ has many other programs, so maybe one of them will take up this series. So we have covered so many topics during the past 2 years. We talked about COVID-19 and the impact on the economy, about AFCFTA, about renewable energy and many other things. Today it's about IMF. I would say every time, and this is why I also really appreciate this series, is because we have developed a format which allows utmost participation with the audience. So it's not only a let's say front-backed presentation. We really invite all participants to come and join and share their remarks also for today, please. And what we do is afterwards we put all what has been said here, not all, but I mean at least very good remarks we put into recommendations, which you'll find in press releases, and sometimes we even pick them up in an individual policy paper, and both of them will be published on IMANI's website. We feature it on our social media channels, and do not hesitate to ask us for previous debates outcomes. So, and this is what the whole idea was behind this format. So. We from GIZ, we want to support and to provide sharp analysis for Ghanaian policymakers and decision makers, and this is why we partnered together with IMANI. And although I would say sometimes we had heated debates, overall it's been always sharp analysis, and I'm thankful for this. So hope we're gonna end on a good note tonight. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's put our hands together for Richard and Mr. Franklin Kujo as well for putting this together and the remarkable work that has gone into this particular assignment tonight, or this evening, I should say. We have a huge task on our hands, and we are privileged to have distinguished individuals that I believe, and I'm sure that you would agree with me by the end of the entire program, that are going to do justice to the subject that we have at hand. So, how will Ghana's 17th IMF program impact investment in agricultural and manufacturing sector? Ghana's return to the IMF, what it means for improving the agriculture and manufacturing business environment. I'm going to attempt to give a background, and then I will introduce our panelists, our distinguished panelists, who will help us digest the subject for this afternoon. So like many other sub-Saharan African countries, Ghana has had a love affair with the International Monetary Fund, that's the IMF, since independence in 1957. And the country is again seeking assistance from the IMF to enable the country to address a looming balance of payment and debt crisis, as well as restore broader policy credibility. It is the second time in the past 3 years, and 17th since independence in 1957, that Ghana has turned to the IMF to help fix structural macroeconomic imbalances. Ghana, under the Fourth Republic, has struggled to maintain macroeconomic stability and has had a checkered history with stabilization policies. It is a history of a relatively stable macroeconomic environment informed by sensible fiscal policy backed by sound monetary policy between elections and fiscal and disciplined, combined with loose monetary policies around election periods. However, this political business cycle is very costly economically, socially, and politically as well. Fiscal consolidation measures require painful adjustment costs that are unevenly distributed, reflecting higher inflation, higher public debt, and the associated debt servicing obligations, creating uncertainties for the business and investment community. This instability has dwarfed the country's ability to ensure inclusive and broad-based growth that benefits everyone and narrows inequality, thus defeating the long-held trickle-down effect in economics. Despite these challenges, most IMF lending is underpinned by countries committing to a program of economic policies, structural reforms, including improving the business environment within this context, the extent to which such IMF programs can help developing countries such as Ghana implement agri-led industrialization and value-adding manufacturing to build the economy to withstand internal and external shocks is often asked. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this evening we have a task to sort of evaluate how this country's agriculture sector will benefit from our return to the IMF. That is, if there is anything to benefit. How do we also ensure that we don't get back to the IMF as a result of building on the agricultural sector? What lessons can we learn from the past 17 times that we have visited the IMF? That is, if there are lessons to learn at all. My distinguished panelists for this afternoon, Professor Godfred Bobkin, Senior Fellow, IMANI Ghana. Shall we put our hands together for him? Mr. Anthony Morrison is the Chief Executive Officer of Chamber of Agribusiness. Let's put our hands together for him as well. Dr. Humphrey Eyim Dake, the President AGI. A big round of applause for him. Mr. Edward Karawe is General Secretary, General Agric Workers Union. Let's put our hands together for him. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my name is Samuel Ajiman, and I'm going to start with Professor Bobkin on this subject. If you can just give us your preliminary take on this.
Thank you very much.
Hold on to it when you tap it.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. All protocol observed. I also want to thank GIZ for providing the funding for this dialogue series, which has also enhanced my perspective on our economy for the years that I've been part of this reform dialogue. I've learned a lot, and I want to say I'm very grateful to GIZ and then IMANI. It's interesting that the subject matter this afternoon has to do with another IMF program. And if we say it will not be the last one, it's not like we don't like this country, but it's simply because we've had enough evidence to support that we have been successful at doing the things that take us to the fund. In the time past, it was taking us 4 years. Now we are shortening that. The last time Ghana got support from the IMF was in April 2020. The last fund-supported program was actually April 2019. And Mr. Kujo, if you remember, at the end of the 16th IMF program, we had a forum at IMANI to look at the 16th IMF program comprehensively. And we concluded that it is not the question of whether Ghana will go there again or not, but it's the question of when. At the end of that forum, the conclusion was that if Ghana was going to do all the reforms, outstanding reforms, measures under the program, and will commit to greater fiscal discipline, then there will be no need for Ghana to return to the IMF. Some of the policies that were, or measures that were announced included setting up a fiscal council. Then when the government was in opposition, they said the fiscal council was going to be independent, and a number of other reforms. But we failed to act. The fundamentals of the economy actually started deteriorating, as we are all told, before COVID came. Even if COVID made its headquarters in Ghana, we provided a context. The results of that is that because of low resilience of our economy, we succumbed to the pressure and the shocks. Whilst we are towards the end of August and we are talking about IMF program, it was our considered view that the optimal time for Ghana to have made the application was last year. If we had done, probably by now a program would have been concluded. The delay is costing us and is creating a bigger hole now. What gets sacrificed in all of this has been critical investment in the growth-enhancing areas that should move us out of poverty. The neglect or the culprit has been agriculture, agribusiness, and manufacturing. In 2003, Ghana signed on to the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, which among other things required that we commit to at least 10% in terms of budgetary allocation to that sector. And among other things, investment in technology, infrastructure, and all of that, that was supposed to give us a minimum growth of 6%. Ghana could not keep to that. In fact, studies by Oxfam between 2010 and 2015 indicated that Ghana was one of the least committed countries to narrowing inequality through agriculture. The highest was Mali, that committed averagely 11% of their budget to agriculture, followed by Burkina Faso, 10.3%, and then Niger, 9.8%. Probably it will not be strange if you get to know that Ghana was importing tomatoes from a desert country, Burkina Faso. There is a reason. The least committed ones, you find Ghana at the bottom, below 3%. Of course, our neighbors, we are not neighbors for nothing. Nigeria, 2.8%. Cote d'Ivoire, in terms of agriculture, 3.6%. The reason this subject matter is important is that if you look at the growing unemployment, the inequality reducing effect of agriculture is the highest. Our job creation capacity rests with agriculture and agribusiness. Studies have shown that if we boost agriculture output by $1 million, it will create along its path 750 jobs. That's the data. From the Ghana Statistical Service, within what we call the social accounting metrics, with the exception of output, agriculture has the highest multiplier effect when it comes to employment and then income. Again, agriculture has the highest inequality reducing effect with an index of negative 0.41. If you have this data and we are driven by the data, then it means that we are in a position actually to bring inclusive growth and be able to feed ourselves. And why we could have made agriculture the backbone of this economy, the evidence is clear. The net food import of Africa in 2015 was $35 billion. This is how the business community reacts to data. And this was projected to reach $110 billion by 2025. That meant that that's a huge market for Ghana to take advantage of, particularly within the framework of the African Continental Free Trade. Of course, if you don't make the required investment, and the nature of the sector, agriculture, agribusiness, linked that to manufacturing is such that without adequate funding from the public sector, from the state, it's very difficult to leave all of that to the private sector to fund in terms of critical infrastructure and also in terms of their business model, even if they look at it from the net present value or so. But now that we are under an IMF, or we are going for an IMF program, actually, the future rests with us because the IMF will not impose a program on us. We are going to develop the program ourselves. So this is the best time to make the right input into whatever program that will be developed, focusing on agriculture, agribusiness, and manufacturing. The reason I see accommodating perspective from the fund is that, unlike the IMF of old, the IMF of today is much concerned about inequality. It's much concerned about unemployment. So because the issue of inequality, the issue of climate change, and the rest of them have assumed some level of macro criticality, for which reason in the IMF's own macro framework of doing things, they value them. So any program that involves significant funding to agriculture, agribusiness, and manufacturing, I think can be accommodated. It depends on how we rationalize our expenditure along these lines and also create the right environment for private sector to complement the public sector investment in that area. For the private sector, they want stable environment. Macroeconomic stability, as the Vice President once said, that macroeconomic stability is like fresh air. You deny anybody fresh air, they're going to have challenges. And we have not been able to guarantee macroeconomic stability for a long time, which would enable the private sector to be able to leverage on. There are two schools of thought about this. There are those who think that macroeconomic stability is a condition precedent to economic transformation. That before you can talk about socio-economic transformation, you need to guarantee macroeconomic stability. And to do so, you need its persistence is also important. But as you read from the background concept, that since 1992, we've not been able to guarantee macroeconomic stability consistently over a long period of time, from which we can transform this economy by making the right decisions. What have we seen? What we have observed since 1992 in this country has to do with a period of relative macroeconomic stability, informed by sensible fiscal policy, backed up by sound monetary policy only in between elections. Then, in all the competitive elections that we've had, we then mess up the macro variables because the goal then is about winning the election, and then we undermine the fundamentals of the economy. Election-related fiscal deficit has averaged more than 4% in all the major competitive elections that we have seen. The reality is that election-related excesses do not go to the productive sectors of the economy. So once we are done with the election, then that excess injection of liquidity will cause inflationary pressures to head up. And therefore, we then use the next 1 or 2 years to restore macroeconomic stability, and then the next election shows up. So we've been going in circles. When it happens that way, it's very difficult for private sector to plan. We've had instances in this country because of macroeconomic instability. Average lending in Ghana's financial market was around 12 months. That type of lending does not support agriculture. That type of lending does not support manufacturing. That type of lending only supports import. So the type of credit that was available could only fund import. You import maximum 6 months, you are able to turn it around. Go and pay down your debt and your principal. But the average turnaround in the manufacturing sector is 2 to 3 years. In the agriculture sector, it's a little longer than that. So if you have a type of funding with a maturity of 12 months, and the average turnaround in terms of the investment side is 2 to 3 years, if you go for that type of funding, you're going to run into maturity mismatch. Meaning that your financing will mature, your asset side wouldn't have matured. If it happens that way, people would abandon production, value addition, agriculture, and then would all go into import. And you can see that all over the place in this country. The successful entrepreneurs who talk on radio and we listen to them, all that they do is to import. The good number of the manufacturing firms in this country, a good number of them actually import the item and add a local logo on it. So the manufacturing actually doesn't take place here. So when it comes to the value addition where job creation can come, we have actually outsourced that. The results of that, if we see greater unemployment, if we see challenges, inequality, and the rest of that, we could not blame anybody else because this is essentially within our control. It's simply because over the years, we have failed to do the needful. Probably I will end here, and then I'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bomking. Agriculture contributed 29.3% in 2010 to the GDP. This dwindled by 2015 to 20%. Yet Professor Bomking is telling us that agric has the highest effect in terms of bringing inclusive growth in this country. The IMF is concerned with job creation, and Prof believe agriculture can create that job that we need. Ghana is the least countries to commit to use agric to reduce poverty. We fail to act from lessons that we should have learned from the 16th IMF that we attended. Our credit and lending doesn't support agriculture. Lessons from Professor Bomking's submission. We're going to delve into this because we've encountered quite a number of small and medium enterprises, young people involved in agriculture. There's a young man producing snails who has complained bitterly that he can't even meet his demand. From October 2021 till now, he has been able to make a profit of 1 million Ghana cedis. He can't meet the demand of snails, people demanding to sell in African market outside these countries. How do we support and expand in this direction? We have the likes of Benz Oil, who are ranking #1 when it comes to the stock market and all of that, yet they can't meet their demand. What are we doing if we need to create jobs from here? The president of AGI is here, Dr. Humphrey Ayim Dake. Shall we hear from him, please? Your first and preliminary statement.
All right, thank you, MC and colleagues. All protocols upheld. We are grateful to be part of this engagement, and that's stated by my earlier speaker, Prof. It is a cyclical issue, and here we are once again to engage on the same subject. It's our prayer that we will find a workable solution such that in the next engagement, we will be discussing and measuring the extent of success in the reforms and the intent of the IMF in the plans of government, bringing about stability, which is the primary focus of the IMF, and also aiding us in stabilizing our macroeconomic indicators. So the question arises that, can one say the structure of the economy as it stands will definitely take us out of the set position in the next cyclical event that we might be expecting once upon a time as the year rolls. Can one say that the productive sector as it stands is robust enough that once this intended program with the IMF is rolled out, will create the requisite revenue streams to support government's balance of payment deficit into the years? Can one say that the role of a liberalized market in the agri-sector connecting to industrialization is robust enough to lead us out of this state? The role of parastatals in the economy, the role of the state in a liberalized market. Can one say that the interrelationship between stabilization and the structural adjustment inherited over the years are robust enough to exit the IMF in years to come? Statistics and then various programs that we have run over the years, as captured in data, will indicate to you that we're still behind time. And we know the intentions of, or the mandate of IMF in such circumstances. The primary mandate is to bring about balance of payment deficit and stabilization of the macroeconomic indicators. And as granted that that is so, will one say that granted that we do a 3-year program, we'll have significant transformation in the structural position of our economy to guarantee us an IMF-free engagement into the years? Would we have developed the discipline to rationalize our expenditure and our incomes or our revenues based upon the nature of our economy? Can we live within our means into the years? Those are really difficult questions to answer considering the position and the structure of our economy. Historically, we are aware from the 70s, the Great Recession, and how it pushed low development countries to implement all manner of interventions that were not successful, and the role of the World Bank through the structural adjustment programs, combining it with the role of the IMF over the years, and today, the experiences and the lessons that we've learned over the period. How much have we used the said lessons to transform our economy? Would one say that our political dispensation, it's a concern? Can one say policy inconsistency, can it be underpinned by the political structure that we run? So there are a number of concerns that comes to the table as one reflects and wonders whether someday we could exit the IMF clause and then be purely independent and do what is needful in transforming our country. From the position of AGI in a series of engagement with the Bank of Ghana, from the perspective of the macroeconomic management deploying the exchange rate policies as well as the fiscal, we have engaged and stated that a combination of the structural transformation and the stability approach, which today is an endorsement of the activities and actions of the World Bank and the IMF, it's what is needed. However, how do we drill this into policy and create policy consistencies that goes beyond political errors, such that programs that are rolled out, i.e. a clear example will be cash crops program rolled out for cashew 10 years ago. Such plans are consistent that transcend each political governance can the policies of the previous regime be enshrined in a national development policy that will guarantee us consistency? Can one say that such policies that are rolled out are well scoped? Do we have clear, quick implementation plan within our political mandate? Can one say that the data collected within the policy engagement and implementation are timely reviewed and tweaked to make sure that the intentions of the policies into the period are well executed within the political period? Then one will finally ask, do we have the right infrastructure? Are we operating within the right monetary policy rules such that we could finance and create a conducive environment for the private sector to play a part in this said transformation and agenda and taking Ghana out of the IMF, and such that it doesn't become a cyclical issue? These are the concerns that we reflected on, and as we've been invited to participate in this engagement, we are determined to lay out our intentions regarding what industry expects, the integration and the value chain analysis, the interventions that are needed in the value chain that will guarantee price and guarantees sufficient raw materials for industries to pick and roll out and create the relevant jobs that will be sustainable and help us create sufficient revenue by virtue of active, productive sectors that government can get its revenue and also balance its books. On this note, I wish to thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to further engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Humphrey Ayim-Dak as the president of AGI. So what we're going to do, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is that this is going to be very interactive after the preliminary submissions and positions that have been given by our panelists. We will engage, we'll bring it down, we'll move it away from the academics and bring it down to the grounds. Example is what Professor Bobkin, for instance, gave, that we have tomatoes being produced in Burkina Faso, yet every day we have women and men moving tomatoes from Burkina Faso through the Paga border into Ghana. What land does Burkina Faso have that Ghana doesn't have? We'll bring it down and then engage everyone. Fortunately for us, we have an array of experts in the auditorium that I believe are going to assist us to do justice. On this note, let me recognize the presence of the former presidential candidate on the ticket of the Convention People's Party, Professor Busakara Isiele. Let's put our hands together for him. Good to see you, Prof. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take the position from the Chamber of Agribusiness. Mr. Anthony Morrison is the Chief Executive Officer. Let's put our hands together for him as well.
Thank you very much, everyone. It is a good opportunity to be here to discuss this particular topic. I think this program couldn't have come up at a time better than this because obviously of the challenges we're facing in the sector. Let me first of all preface my presentation to properly contextualize some of the policies that we have the benefit to run as a country. We have the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Plan that was initiated by African Union. We also have the ECOWAS Agriculture Sector Policy. And in Ghana, we have developed several policies over the past 60 years plus of the country's history. However, having implemented the METASIP, which is the Medium-Term Agriculture Sector Investment Plan, and the FASDEP, the Food and Agriculture Sector Development Plan, we have realized that there have been some shortfalls in the implementation process, obviously due to the fact that, and this has also been captured by the Economic Intelligence Unit, over the years, Ghana government have failed to show obvious commitment to agriculture policies We have several policies within the industry that are not harmonized. And obviously, we also have policies that are not properly aligned to global events, global economies, and national economic challenges. So these and many other faceted challenges have worked obviously against how policies are developed within the agriculture industry, how policies are implemented. We have in the past seen the adoption of several IMF policies from the Structural Adjustment Plan, Vision 2020, PALM's card, and several of them. We saw how strategic within the PNDC time we had VORADEP, the NORIDEP, IRIDEP, and all this geared towards developing the agro-industry sector within the country. However, little can be said about some of this and their sustainability or exit strategies in terms of doing some impact assessment. Over the past decade, the relative size of the agriculture sector in Ghana has more than halved, amounting to more than 15.3% of the nominal GDP. And in 2019, we went down. And you can look at the sector and its performance. I would say that if you take up the 2018, the agriculture census, it shows that we have quite about 7.3 agriculture households. That's 7.3 million agriculture sector households, representing quite about 44.7% of the country's population. We have also seen some other figures about 51.3% from other publications. But what we are expecting out of this IMF policy or the IMF engagement is to see strategically how the private sector primarily is given the opportunity to lead in the development of a long-term strategic agriculture sector investment plan that can provide sustainable agro-industry anchored on agro-industry exports, because the forex is obviously amounting to some of the challenges we're having. Currently, some of our members who are exporting are having to borrow money here and there to mitigate the forex challenges. If we come to the production sector of the agriculture value chain, we have seen in the past 2 years, the cost of food production continues to increase. Fertilizers, we have seen in the area of NPK, moving from 160, now being sold almost 340, depending on your closeness to Accra. We have seen urea 46, that has crossed the almost 500 cities threshold. The prices of seeds have gone up tremendously. And this is the engine of the crop sector. If, as a country, you do not have enough vibrant seed production sector, your industry is as good as dead. The publication from the BFT a few days ago shows government owing the private local indigenous seed production sector 207 million cedis. This is as a result of supply in the 2021 production season. And let me say that these are primarily in the areas of grains and cereals. We import well over 80% of the country's vegetable seeds. And if government is supplying seeds imported to our vegetable farmers, and also some of the hybrid seeds that we import, I'm sure we'll be looking at figures well over 500 million cedis. That is only for the crop sector. I mean, if you even add the agrochemicals, one area, one variety is glyphosate. Last year, we were buying glyphosate at 16 cedis. Now, you'll be lucky to get it at 52 cedis. So that should tell you the tremendous challenges facing the local farmer, the peasant farmer, the poor smallholder farmer. Amounting to all these challenges is the increasing cost of labor, transportation, several logistical challenges, and also the fuel challenges. We used to plow an acre for about 120, 150. We are now plowing the same acreage at 280, 320, depending on the distance from the main road. So we have an array of challenges, but I would like to just look at how we have come as a country. The development of every economy is anchored on agriculture. The derivatives of agriculture has been able to develop several economies to where they are today. So they look at agriculture, industrialization, and services. Where agriculture is doing well, we can boldly say that industries and services are providing the critical complementary support. But in Ghana, we anchored agriculture on services doing well. So the rhetorics, the dynamics, the set out goals and objectives at the first place are even wrong and not properly aligned. Our expectations are that we'll begin to look at a kind of long-term agriculture sector policy. We expect government to provide some externalities critical to agriculture production. If you take the poultry industry that has been crying and begging for several years, we import well over everything in that sector. Ghana's current day-old chick importation rate is about 18 million day-old chicks annually. Over 70% are coming from Netherlands. We import the rest from the Unity Brothers in Burkina Faso. We bring some from Morocco, Egypt. And as a country, attending the IBA African Union ECOWAS meeting in Burkina Faso, Ghana has a better policy implementation strategy, but the commitment is our problem. Nigeria has the biggest poultry industry in Africa, and it is such that as a country, if we are able to develop our parent stock for day-old chick production, we should be able to mitigate some of the rate at which we import the day-old chicks. For instance, if one is costing $1 or €1 50 as a landing rate, incorporate that into the current forex rate. You understand if one is losing 100 chicks a day as a result of little challenges on the farm. Aside the day-old chicks, we import everything of the feed additives, the likes of lysine, methionine, decalciums, the enzymes, the vitamins, the vaccines are all imported. So it is an industry where we do not have any ownership. The only ownership is our ability to produce cereals and grains to feed the poultry industry directly. And I'm just trying to take my time to break so that you get to understand, obviously, the various challenges we're facing. It is an industry where, if you look at the importation, we do well over 50 million metric tons of frozen chicken only from the European Union. Data available from the European Union Agriculture Intelligence Desk shows Ghana is the third largest importer or trade partner. And we have Brazil and the US. So data from even the US, United States Department for Agriculture, shows that, yes, of course, we are importing quite a huge amount of frozen chicken across board.
So one of the things I'm going to have to ask you to also add while you continue on this, Mr. Morrison, aside recounting some of these difficulties, and you have already talked about the lack of alignment, lack of harmonization. Can you give us specific policies that ought to be aligned and harmonized, that can deal with some of these problems that you're talking about?
Well, yes, obviously, when you talk about non-alignment of policies, you're looking at global trend and global production intelligence and the global economy, how it is going, the various derivatives. You expect to develop a policy here in Ghana that can be contextualized into the global events. As a country, we have been looking at production policies for several years, and we are no longer at the production policy stage as a country. At the private sector level, you're looking at market and trade oriented policies. You first of all need to look at where is your market before you design the production criteria or indicators. But we have been looking at production consistently, and this is where we miss the link. We delink ourselves from identifying the market, the right varieties, the right way to produce, and specifically contextualize the various things that needs to be done. Now, government commitment, as you asked, it has been the fact that over the years, no government has been able to actually provide or make it up to the Malabo or the Maputo Declaration of the African Union. We have considerably been doing well over 0.1% as against the 10% requirement for the increasing budgetary allocation to the agriculture sector. And these are some of the major challenges impacting on the development of the agriculture sector in Ghana.
Okay. So we're not committing enough funds to the agric sector in your view. But in your view, again, you mentioned the fact that we're sort of taking the production aspect seriously, but we're not looking at the market aspect. Is that the case? So what's the D-link? Because I'm looking at the likes of, and I mentioned them earlier, Bob, who is producing and getting access to the market and getting a lot of demand from the market, but are not able to produce enough. We are looking at people who are producing on a very small scale, small and medium enterprises, producing snails on a small scale with a large market out there. How do we bridge that gap?
It's quite an area where I think that using insurance mitigating system that can help you access credit, like GESEL has been doing the industry, but primarily it has to be based on a national derivatives as to what commodities as a country do we identify as a major anchoring point for our policy development. But for him as a person, he needs to look at, sometimes I'm not talking about him per se, but sometimes too, the stories are nice to be told. But when you go down to the books, you go down to the production, you go down to what actually is happening, you realize that even at the production stage, there are that challenges because some of the sectors are highly critical and they are doing well and they can do it. What needs to be done in such cases is to look at, okay, if really you have the market guarantee, what are the areas that you need to look at? Are the financial regulations or the financial systems supporting your market guarantee? So GESEL, for instance, will do that. There are other organizations that will provide some of these support systems for you to structure a better financial proposal to be able to uptake financing to increase your production.
Okay. So thank you very much. That's the Chief Executive Officer of the Chamber of Agribusiness, and because you are coming from the ground, from the field, I really needed to ask you quite a lot. And then I'm sure that we're also going to get a lot from Mr. Edward Karawe, who is the General Secretary of the General Agric Workers Union. But the thing I wish to get from Mr. Karawe is that we are talking about us returning to IMF for the 17th time. I think Professor Bob King or Mr. Morrison, one of them, talked about the fact that we've had PAMSCAD. Even before then, we had this Operation Feed Yourself under IKA Champon. We had GPRS 1 and 2. We had PAMSCAD. We have come all this far. Today we have 1D, 1F. The other one, job something. Planting for food and jobs. Where are we not getting it right? The fact that Gari factory is no longer in Asamankase, or the tomatoes are getting rotten in Agogo, yet we are importing tinned tomatoes day in and day out. The fact that we are still importing tomatoes from Burkina Faso when we have tomatoes getting rotten in Agogo. Can we get all these sorted out? Because from the background that I gave earlier, these are the requirements that we're going to get from the IMF. They want us to structure our reforms and including improving the business environment. How do we get all of this right? So as we all chew around this, and we're going to come to the tables, we'll take from other experts as well. But if we can bring these out so that by the time we all leave here, we know what to expect as far as agriculture is concerned, the impact of this IMF. Can we take the position of Mr. Edward Karawena?
Yeah, thanks very much. And then we are extremely happy to be given an opportunity to take part in this discussion because we are a trade union and we are also farmers. High-level discussions, that is not what we are interested in. We are interested in the outcomes. But we have reached a point where I think you have seen the need, IMANI and GIZ, to invite us to take part in the discussion. We are very much happy. You see, to start with, you see, when you see IMF, is IMF a solution or a problem? If Ghana has gone to IMF, and this is now the 17th time, there's something wrong. Either IMF is a problem, or Ghana is a problem. So the question as to whether Ghana will go back to IMF after this, it's neither here nor there for me because IMF is not a solution to Ghana's problems. IMF is basically propagating and enforcing market-oriented corporate governance. IMF is driving unbridled liberalization. IMF is talking about unbridled free trade. IMF is talking about, cutting the size of government. And Prof indicated that IMF of today appears to be different from IMF of yesterday. But IMF cannot be so much born again such that they can abandon all their fundamental reasons why they exist. The questions I want to put forward is this. What will IMF do when government decides to de-invest in agriculture? If you take this year, for instance, and that is in relation to the planting for food and jobs. Last year, government subsidy was 36% on fertilizer and the seed. This year, 2022, government decided to cut down to 15%. What will IMF do? Can IMF force government to go and increase the subsidy back to 36% or more? Government this year decided to cut down the subsidy, that is the total fertilizer that they would give to farmers, around 25%, up to 25% of last year, 2021. The question again is, what will IMF do if you go to IMF? These are things that IMF has no solution. Now, the other One is, what will IMF do when government is refusing to fix the roads to the farm gates? Where the food is produced and where the food will come from, the roads to that place are deplorable. What will IMF do? Can IMF force government to do those things? What will IMF do when government gives wrong data and statistics? Because, look, you see, in 2021, government indicated, and this was in the President's State of the Nation address on 5th January 2021, that 2020 maize production had gone up by 110% over 2019 maize production. And that was in the year of COVID. 2020 was the heart of the COVID. And yet, per our statistics, we produce maize production had gone up by 110%. Rice production had gone up by 48%. But we all saw what happened last year. 2 months, 3 months after January, what happened? There was no maize in the system. What will IMF do when we go to them? What will IMF do when government develop and implement the discounted benchmark value policy? You know, this is another form of subsidy, and you subsidize imports. To the extent that some of the imports can be produced here, and you decide to have that policy and implement it. What would IMF do? Can IMF compel government to not to do those things? You see, we have the problem. If we want to get an IMF over the years have actually plumbed this country into this problem. In the 1980s, the Economic Recovery Program, the Structural Adjustment Program, cut down the size of government. Yes, we Ghanaians should hold government on to cut down its size. When IMF comes and they say cut down the size of the government they are talking about labor. Between 1983 to 1990, the number of workers that have been laid off, we have never been able to get them back. If we go to IMF, are we now going to increase our employment? So IMF is not the solution. IMF has been part of our problems, and we don't need to go to IMF to be able to solve our problems. In fact, the fact that government has now decided to go to IMF, we should all be ready and know that our problems are going to exacerbate. They are not going to come down. If we want to solve the problems of Ghana, look, I just don't know what is an IMF. That we can never stay away from them. What good ideas do they have that we cannot find them anywhere? I'm saying this because how many professors are there in this country? Prof is here. What doesn't he know about the economy? I've been listening to IMANI. Who has knowledge more than IMANI? There are other institutions. Why don't you bring all these people together? Put them in a room. Give them 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month. They will find the solutions for us. Why do we go to IMF? IMF, what ideas do they have about my village? What do they know about the farm? What type of farming do they do? Do they know my culture more than us? You know, we are not ready to solve our problems. And if we go to IMF, we'll continue to have more of them. So the question as to whether or not, how will Ghana 17th IMF program impact on investment in agriculture and manufacturing? It's when we decide. If you go to IMF, IMF cannot increase your investment in agriculture. So my point is that here is a country, we have leaders, we have people who they governed. We should hold our leaders on. Our leaders should also know that we have all that it takes, even the money. Look, when the money they are going to take from IMF, if they make Ghanaians convinced, I think that Ghanaians will contribute 1 cedi, 2 cedis, and give to government to implement. But because we don't trust them, They will not get that money from here. Even the rich will not give them the money. And when they go to IMF, conditionalities. IMF is with conditionalities. It has never been without conditionalities. And those conditionalities are never in the interest of this country. If they are in the interest of this country, why are we still today? And if IMF exists and government begins to behave another way, and then later on IMF comes. If I were IMF, you see, IMF should also be honest enough to say, look, Ghana, I'm sorry, you have come to us over and over many times. We came, we helped you, you did this and that. When we left, you mismanaged again. Therefore, this time, we are not ready to come to you. We won't support you. But IMF cannot do that because IMF will become, what? I mean, they will not have any use. They will not have work to do. So they have to accept countries like Ghana, which have gone there many times, and it has not helped. If you continue to go to a particular doctor, you've gone to the doctor 16 times, and your ailment is not cured, why should you still go to that doctor? And if that doctor is also aware that he has been giving you directions, what to do and not to do, and you refuse to do that, the doctor should be honest and say, look, you are my patient, I can't treat you anymore, find your solution somewhere. So this discussion is to our leaders. Where are they here? Initially, someone was supposed to come from the ministry. Where are they? They are not here. Where are they? And I know they are listening, wherever they are. But it is not enough to listen. It is not enough to listen. Your people are crying for solutions. The solutions are all here. You don't want to implement them. Some do not even require money. They don't require money. We have the knowledge, we have everything. So my opinion is that, look, going to IMF is dangerous. This country will never have peace so long as they continue to visit IMF. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caraway. I'm going to come to the earlier panelists that I have. That's the four, and I would start with Professor Bobkin when I come back on that to find out whether or not the fact that we have gone to IMF. As Mr. Caraway is saying, we shouldn't expect anything better. But now that we are heading there for discussions, what are the inputs? What do we have to put on the table? What should we expect? That hopefully, there can be some magic out of the 17th edition, even though Mr. Caraway definitely would disagree to that. But I will go to Dr. Abu Sakara and then take his perspective on the general agriculture sector, considering the immense expertise that he has in this particular area. I will then also go to, I think we have Mr. Kwesi Gesal, who would also be speaking to the financial aspect of agriculture. And gentlemen, I'm going to force you to do a minute each on this, and then I'll come back to the panel. But as Mr. Caraway said, he said almost everybody is listening. And fortunately, and thanks to JoyNews, we are live on JoyNews, and so almost everybody is listening indeed. And those that you were worried that they are not in this auditorium, hopefully are indeed listening. Also, thanks to the media, TV3 is covering this as well. The Ghanaian Times is covering this. TV Africa is covering this. The Ghana Web is here. Atinka is here. And I am sure that this message will be carried far and wide. Let me acknowledge the presence of some distinguished organizations that we have in our presence. The Ghana Association of Workers Union is here. Shall we put our hands together for them for showing up? The European Union is here with us. Let's put our hands together for them as well. The German Embassy, the Netherlands Embassy as well. Let's put our hands together for all of them. Also in our midst are some distinguished personalities. Mr. Kofi Bentil, Vice President IMANI, is with us. Let's put our hands together. Mr. Samson Asaki is the Executive Secretary of Importers and Exporters Association. He is with us. Let's put our hands together for him as well. Dr. Abu Sakara.
Thank you very much. I was hoping to wait until the end to give my comments. But be that as it may, my first question was, where is Mofa? And I looked across and I saw Anthony Morrison sitting there, and I said, you're responsible for Mofa not coming because they're afraid of what you're going to tell them. But the truth of the matter is that the impact of going to IMF has a direct and indirect impacts. And the indirect impacts are to create an enabling environment. But of course we know for increased investment, of course we know that the direct increased investment comes from private sector and banks. So simply going to the IMF does not guarantee that there will be the corresponding investment that will come from the private sector, because there are many other factors in between. So I think we need to get that very clear. It's not like you're going from the IMF to borrow a huge amount of money which you're going to give directly to farmers. You're going to maybe improve extension, improve roads, etc., but that doesn't lead directly to investment in agriculture, although it enables agriculture. So I think we need to be very clear about that. So the second issue then is that if this is the case, then our question should be whether IMF can restore or the IMF program can restore the conducive environment for investment. If so, how long will it take? Short, medium, or long term? And if it is medium to long term, what happens in between to the agriculture sector investment? The other question then is that, of course, how much of what we think is going to happen, even from the enabling environment, is just our wishful thinking, and how much is reality? From the track record of previous investments, has what we thought would happen actually happened? And if it has not happened 16 times, why do you think it will happen the 17th time? And it may be that some of those decisions are not related to just creating the conducive environment from IMF programs, but more on the issue of we ourselves setting a different path for our economy by creating even a different architecture for our economy, recognizing where we are and where our comparative advantages can be turned into competitive advantages. On that score, then, we have to ask, what are the critical prohibitive factors for investment? And these will come to transaction costs. Really, when you talk about enabling environment, infrastructure, all those things come down to transaction costs. And the question is, what is the 17th IMF program going to do to transaction costs materially that the other 16 programs have not? Is it going to result in reduced interest rates, cost of capital? Let's not even say interest rates, cost of capital. Is it going to result in reduced fuel transaction costs or fuel costs for agriculture? Is it going to result in a changed composition of fossil fuel and renewable energy, where we may get cheaper renewable energy for agriculture? Just this week, I saw an article of 13.4 megawatt plant solar power commissioned at Kaleo in Upper West region. So I called my contact there. I said, oh, this is good news. Will that mean you will get cheaper energy for irrigation? He says, oh, no. The whole thing is being managed by VRA, and they're going to put the power onto the grid, and it will come at the same rates. Then what are we talking about when we're talking about diversifying into renewable energy? We thought the whole idea was that areas which were off-grid will get the solar power, and that will go into renewable energies being used for production, irrigation, agriculture over a long term, and then you pay it off. Yeah. Then that way it has a direct impact. But if it is simply to put the power onto the main grid and charge it at the same rates, then what impact does it have? Maybe it just looks good for climate agriculture that we have some amount of energy coming from solar power, but does it actually affect transaction costs? So I think the other aspect of it is trade policy. Whenever you talk about agriculture and you don't talk about trade policy, I get upset, because it is one of the critical constraints.
we talk about purchasing power of the urban versus rural areas. We know that the purchasing power in urban areas is higher than in rural areas. That is why they're able to buy the imported goods. And they are the first point of call for imported goods which compete with domestic goods for agriculture. So if the purchasing power is there, but it is being, serviced by imports, then how do you expect the increased transaction costs from rural areas to come and catch up with it? Transaction costs.
Okay.
So I think this goes to the question of your snail person who says he's got demand and yet he cannot expand. Right?
Yeah.
Don't get that. Is there a market failure somewhere in the system? If so, where is it? Is it that if he were to enter the domain of taking credit for expanding his production, he would soon get into trouble, and therefore he doesn't do it? That's a good question. Is it that, he may be at the current level where he's operating, he may be able to piggyback on low cost of transportation, but if he were to expand and have to get his own vehicle to move that, he would have to bear the full cost of transport costs, and that would then make it uncompetitive. So I think these are the areas that we must look at, because fundamentally, this is where it boils down to.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Doctor?
But the last issue I wanted to raise was segmentation of agriculture. We often come here and sit.
I think, Doc, the idea is that, after your minute, we're still going to have to come back. Come back to it. So I'm glad that you raised the issue of the gentleman doing the snails and the ability to expand, and also the fact that we talked about finance somewhere from the chamber, and whether the issue of finance is also some of the impediments that we are seeing, the lack of funds to expand from the front lines of the small and medium enterprises, those who are involved in agriculture businesses. How do we ensure that they have the required funds to be able to expand and then be able to meet their demand? So I would bring Dr. Mr. Kwesi Kubo Gesal.
Unfortunately, I don't have a PhD, but I'm happy you honor me with one. I think,
one is on the way.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's nice listening to my distinguished colleagues and everyone out there, and it's very good. So I'm the CEO of Gesal Limited. My name is Kwesi Kubo. But I also should point out that I'm speaking also as a farmer, someone who's been in this business for 35 years. Okay. Now, the question is juxtaposing IMF and its impact on agricultural policy. So we all got to be clear. Who plays what role in agriculture? Government has a role to play. Private sector has a role to play. So that's the first thing. I think we all need to get it. 2, in government's role, I hear a lot about investments. And Prof, you mentioned it, but let me give you one historical. Cote d'Ivoire, you said that's 3%. Cote d'Ivoire today is the largest cashew producer in the world, 70,000 metric tons. Rubber, I can go on and on, largest cocoa producer. So the question is not about the quantum of investments. The question is about the policy regulations that ensures whatever money you put in works. Let me give you an example. Our host gentleman mentioned about BOP and ability to meet the markets. The issue of, I would say, probably is land usage, getting access to land. Okay, now let me explain what I mean by that. You want to seek finance, and you want to seek finance based on the cash flow of a business. And the assets of the business tends to be the assets. So if you have a tree crop like oil palm, which is about 25, 30 years, what it means is that other tree crop then becomes your collateral. But of course, that farm has no value to the bank if there's no title to the land, or there are restrictions on land usage. So the challenge is that, what I'm trying to say is that in the short is that sometimes we focus a lot on investment, look at the regulatory policy. And policy for me is everything. Because we've seen how policy can change the dynamics. Like I give you so many examples of it. We are where we are today in terms of our currency depreciation because 2 things are happening. We are not exporting enough.
and we are importing everything. Now, how do we reverse it? IMF or no IMF, some of these things is within our powers to do it. So, for example, you talk about poultry. You mentioned poultry, for example, and I was in a meeting with Farmer Morrison and Co. We look at poultry. Is it because we are not efficient in our maize production systems? Is there preponderance on smallholder farming against commercial farming? Is it because there's dumping effects from countries, Europe, Americas, Mexico, and so forth, which also becoming a major issue for our poultry farmers? We've got to investigate all these. Now, all these things are policy. You know what I mean? For example, let me give you a class example. We do, and my good friend, Mr. Carrier will know about it. I mean, you'll be surprised for the largest organic certified farm of banana is in this country globally. The largest, yes. 600 hectares. Now, the key issue about exports is also about logistics. When you export your product to Europe, your product itself is about 15% of your markup. So what it means is that the other 85% is purely logistics. Cartons, packaging, transportation. Now, in every country, and I've done work in South Africa, Kenya, where horticulture is a major issue, it's the industry that owns the logistics aspect of it. The industry. Because if you even increase your yield by 20%, it comes to about less than 1% in your value. If you become efficient in your logistics, it makes you more competitive.
Okay.
We have issues, for example, at the port, where facility to be maintained and managed by the industry itself is not doing well. And if you take banana, for example, within the last 15 years, we've exported almost 350 million euro. Now, if you compare production cost, Ghana is cheaper than Cameroon because you don't have to do too much fungicide spraying against Ikatoga. But what are we doing? Are we attracting large players or even Ghanaians to go into that sector? What is the strategy here? That you don't need IMF to tell us to do.
Okay.
We ourselves should recognize that unless we generate foreign exchange, we'll be where we are.
Yeah.
So, for me, if you ask me a question, yes, government is going to engage IMF. Let's be sure that in the agricultural space, that we, even though the city now, I'm told, is about 10, we have the opportunity now to be more competitive in our exports. We have the opportunity now to be more competitive in our import substitution.
Yeah.
Because we are importing inflation. Now, the question is that how do we approach these issues? How do we make sure that some conditions that will make our industry work will work? Okay. The last thing I probably want to raise is the issue of production systems. You know, agriculture has changed. Today we talk about agricultural value chains. So, naturally, your contribution to GDP agriculture will go down. And let me give an example of Blue Skies. Blue Skies purchase pineapples, coconuts, mangoes, and process into fruit salad. Those primary producers will be captured in our agricultural production database. But the final product that is shipped abroad will be considered as a manufacturing. So the thing is that if you take data and not analyze well from an agricultural value chain perspective, we'll get it wrong. In any case, as agriculture grows, and Ghana, we are proud to say we have 44.7% engaged in agricultural production, I think it shows inefficiency. Because you see more people going more on the value addition than the production base. So, and these are policies that we've got to regulate. I mean, you drive between here and Akosombo, you've got lands where there's water bodies and people are putting up buildings. Mm-hmm. No issues of control. We know in every plant production, there are three elements: water, health and plant health and diseases, and then nutrition. And if you creeping on lands that are suitable for agriculture, what's going to happen now? So I think that it's an opportunity for all of us here. Let's have this robust debate. Yeah. Let's ask ourselves, why is it that numerous FASDEP, METASIP, I can start over, have all failed? You know, PAMSCAD in the 80s, and those of us who are a bit old in age, we saw PAMSCAD. One of the things that came out of PAMSCAD, you realize in the 80s, early 90s, was the evolution of pineapple and other horticultural products. Because there was a clear policy. And you realize that most of the projects we funded, whether it's Shed 9, whether it's the airport, was to do with research, and ensure that exporters have the capacity to export. The market is there. The challenge has always been production. So let me end here, and I'm sure we can then go to more details.
And I'm going to invite Mr. Kofi Bentil for 2 minutes to also submit to this. Before we come to the general interactive aspect, I would also get to my panelists. But the thing almost all of us are talking about is that we have arable land. And the last speaker just talked about that. Drive almost every part of this country, you see arable land. Yet we complain every time that we are importing everything. People complain we are importing even matchsticks, we are importing toothpick. Yet we used to have matches production from Kede, and somebody from somewhere, it just collapsed and nobody's picking it up. Where are we heading? Do we need IMF to do this? Mr. Karaway is signaling me. Or we can take these initiatives by ourselves. Mr. Bento.
Right. It's clear to me we don't have enough time to deal with these issues. Maybe we have to have another discussion, and the suggestion would be for you in agric to have pinpointed sort of resolutions on what government needs to do in terms of this IMF, this 17th IMF engagement.
Agreed.
So you are protected. But I just want to speak to this issue, which I think is very important, because Mr. Karawu really hits it on the head. You'll be surprised that even in this room and in the general public, people are asking the same question you're asking. If we've been there 16 times and it didn't work, why are we going back the 17th time? And it brought something to my mind. Almost 10 years or so ago, Franklin and I and a couple of our executives were having meetings with World Bank and IMF, and Mr. Chikata reminded us of it a few weeks back. And this is important because of what you said and to bring the matter home. We, IMANI, asked the World Bank and IMF to give us an exit plan. And the discussion was, you are here to help us out of our problems, but we keep coming back to you, just like you said, so it means you are not helping us. And we said, if you succeed as World Bank and IMF, we should not need you again. So prove to us that you are not gaming this thing so that we keep coming back to you. And it was very interesting because they said nobody has said that to them. But well, we did. And they said a few things which are important. They said, one, we don't ask you to come to us. You come to us when you mess up. I'm paraphrasing. When you mess up and you don't have anywhere to go, then you come to us. That's telling you something. It's not for me to tell, or it's not for the doctor to tell you don't get sick again. It's what you do that makes you sick. So, Mr. Karaway, that's what happens when we go back. And we are all here, we all talk to our government, all of us engage them in one way or the other, but we keep going back. Why? This is also very important. When we lead our lives in such a way, and I'm speaking about government and all of us in that sense, that we close all our options and we face real risk. And I'm going to explain why I'm saying so. Because some of us, before we went for this 17th, were telling the government, just like Prof said, that go to IMF and go quickly. Reason is that if you are sick and you go to the doctor later, there's a different outcome than if you go earlier. But we were the same people who were saying IMF should not come here. And we're the same people who asked them to leave. Reason is that today in Ghana, we are shut off from the euro market. We can't go and borrow money. We are shut off. In fact, we checked the country out of an IMF program prematurely when this government came into office. The previous government took us and they checked us out. It's like getting out of the hospital before you were properly, treated. And so we had this thing with IMF. Our local fundraising options are drying up. T-bills are not yielding enough money. Now, I'm saying this because those of us here need to understand these things, that when we got to that point, you were facing a situation where government can't pay salaries. The day government does not pay civil servants salaries in this country, and it goes on for 2-3 months, you will see trouble. You will see how an economy grinds to a halt. And somebody told me something many years ago. He says in his country, he was an American, he says in his country, somebody can steal $10 billion and there will be no effect. But in your country, if somebody steals $1 billion, you will get a civil war. First, I was offended, but later I knew he was right. Why I'm saying what I'm saying is that much as we all don't like going to the IMFs of this world, when we mess up as bad as we have messed up, we don't have any option. Because if we don't go, we will face a real socio-economic meltdown.
Okay.
And today, as we are speaking, we need them to give us money to sort out basic things that we need to sort out. So the question is, how do we not go for the 18th? We need to continue to engage with our governments and force them to listen to some of the things that some of you on the ground say. And to move from there, okay, to find ways to also question them when they make promises that will come back to bite us. Part of why we are in IMF is because of the profligate spending, all kinds of political promises, and all kinds of expenditures that do not make economic sense, which blow us back. So whilst we think about how we don't go and how we don't get into these problems, we need to be thinking about the things we have to give up, because now we would have to give up something.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bento. So IMF has become a necessary evil because our options, we've run out of them. But what emphasis do we have to place on agriculture as we visit there, as we discuss, and as we talk about how to get our economy back on track, Prof?
Thank you very much. I think part of the things that I noted down, Mr. Kofi Bento has talked about them, and thank you very much. Let's put it this way. The IMF doesn't impose a program on any country. The IMF has been smart a couple of decades ago, and they now call it Ghana Government Program supported by the IMF.
Okay, so it's the program of the Ghana government.
Yes.
Just supported by the IMF.
By the IMF. So, and the reason is simple. As we speak right now, on the 1st July when Ghana made the announcement, the Eurobond, the secondary market, the spread narrowed because we were going to the IMF, and that will bring some discipline and all of that. The spread narrowed. The delay is widening the spread. On the second market today, our Euro bonds are trading above 2,000 basis points above the US Treasury yields. This is what credibility deficit does. So nobody told Ghana not to go to the international capital market. We've been priced out by our own actions and inactions. Let me also correct this. If you look at the World Bank Group, and the IMF is here, it's not here to speak for itself. So as an academic, let me share my perspective on that. When it comes to sectorial issues, the IMF doesn't focus more on that. So you have the World Bank that can focus on power sector, that can focus on sector-specific issues within the World Bank Group. The IMF focus on the macro, right? But of course, we know how all the disaggregations play a role in all of that. So you can have the World Bank with a specific intervention in agriculture, a specific intervention in energy, and the rest of them. So the way they operate is different.
Okay.
So some of the things we are actually blaming on the IMF here are actually not within the jurisdiction of the IMF to solve.
Okay.
Even though failures from those sector-specific issues manifest at the macro level, and therefore we think that is the fund's responsibility. No. We must also admit, look, some time ago, Ghana was the darling boy of the IMF. They showcased us how their policies here have yielded results. And we have data to support that. We have data to support periods when we were under an IMF program and how the economy fared. And when we were on our own, how the economy fared. The best helping hand, and I agree, the best helping hand the country can find is at the end of our own arm. It's never at the end of IMF's arm. If we fail, as we have done successfully, right, in doing what we have to do.
In the past,
in fact, we will be unfair to blame the IMF for what we have here. And I'll tell you why. In 2017, Ghana's agricultural growth was more than 6%, actually 6.1%. In 2017, we were under an IMF program.
Okay.
Why did we record that? We did that because that was the beginning of planting for food and jobs, right? And there was increased funding to what? Agriculture. You can check the data. 27, yeah. Yeah. So there was increased funding to agriculture. We have data to support that. We saw the results. This was under an IMF program. So the fund will not stop you necessarily from doing what you think that you have to what? Do. If that would not compromise your macroeconomic what? Stability.
Is that the direction you're suggesting that we go this time around, Prof? Because of time, we focus with good funding on the agricultural sector.
The government itself, post-COVID, indicated that there was going to be agriculture-led economic recovery. They identified some key pillars. What we are hoping, and the reason we have the leverage is that a program hasn't been submitted to the IMF. Remember, the IMF doesn't develop the program.
Yeah.
Ghana government has to what? Develop its own program. Make a diagnosis of what the issues are and how you intend to what? Solve them. And present that to the fund. So we should all be eager to see or make an input into the program that will be what? Develop. Okay. How does that preserve agriculture? How does that ensure that agriculture remains what is supposed to what? Be
good
within the program that we are going to what? Run. How is that linked? Because it's a program. Yeah. Designing a program is competitive, right? Yeah. How is that linked to manufacturing? How is that linked to agribusiness and the rest of them? So actually, we have that leverage to do so. But
when you say we, you're talking about
Ghana government and all of us. I will tell you why. IMF is the last resort. Because that is the only thing left right now to prevent us from reaching Sri Lanka.
Okay, I think that point is well made. Okay. Mr. Karaway is not excited, understandably so, but I'm sure that you and Mr. Bentel have made that very clear that we have no option at this point in time. For the sake of time, Prof, I would have to move to Mr. AGI to also make an input on that. Mr. Dake.
All right, thank you. I just in my preliminary comments, I stated the interrelationship between stabilization and structural adjustments. That gives you clarity when you see the framework of the World Bank and the IMF. And that is what Prof tried to deepen in the discussion. And that is what we're saying to government. Going to IMF alone will not give you the requisite direction to walk out of this situation. You need a combination. IMF will give you the stability. However, for purposes of structural adjustment and to aid GESEL to feed in the value chain, support logistics, focus on industrialization, focus on agriculture, you might need some form of concessionary support from the World Bank. And that is why the two arms going forward from the past history seek to work to balance the stability and your macroeconomic and the microeconomic indicators. Because the micro will affect industry, will affect the individual businessman on the ground, will affect the farmer who is doing the snails. But when you do not get the macro right and you introduce a policy and the exchange rate decides to misbehave, and then the policy rate through Bank of Ghana, because by virtue of that, if inflation is moving out, the Bank of Ghana will figure out how to tame it, and if it's demand-driven, they'll deploy the various tools. Today, it's supply-driven. By virtue of it being supply-driven, you need to get a mixed method, and that's all we've been advocating for. And today, Bank of Ghana will tell you we are no longer using the inflation target model, but we are using an average inflation target model, suggesting that they have enhanced the model to tackle both the demand side and the supply side. So, in a nutshell, we're suggesting to government, table a proposal to IMF. However, in the said model or plan or program to IMF, there must be a condition whereby we can get some form of structural adjustment programs that will aid us move gradually and deepen the job that GESEL is doing in the value chain. All it comes back to is productivity. If we cannot enhance productivity from the production base, from the logistics base, distribution to the market, getting to the doorstep of one district, one factory, and then enhancing the production in the factory base and distributing, you can't even export.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course, it needs a component. We have stated it here, and we have stated many times, and we've stated to the governor.
Good. Good. So that's a good one. In addition to IMF, the proposal is to have the World Bank on the other side. And beyond the World Bank, somebody, Mr. Karawe, says that we should also, in ourselves, be able to put the required discipline in place so that we can take charge of the structure by ourselves. I'm going to take Chamber of Agribusiness. So whilst we stabilize the policy, we stabilize the economy, what do you expect? Chamber of Agribusiness. Is it working? You might want to share with.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, let me say that the relationship between Ghana and IMF is like a student and a teacher. The student keep passing and failing at the same time when he's with the teacher. And when he's not with the teacher, we fail. So we keep going back to the teacher all the time, and the results are always failures. Ghana's agriculture or the agribusiness sector is worth $15 to $20 billion with the last estimate from the Israeli Trade Agency. And the money government is seeking from IMF can all be gained from the agriculture sector. I mean, that is just a drop in the ocean for the agriculture sector. Let me say that the sector will not allow or accept any kind of conditionality within the IMF discussion. That would be a no-no. And this is a message the sector players want me to convey to government.
How can you resist it?
We will resist it. There are different ways of killing a cat. And when we get there, that will be done. As an industry, we've done the agriculture census in 2018. Where is that data sitting as we speak? I want to base this presentation on the non-availability of coded, strong, robust, vibrant data. The World Bank is telling us that African countries or African farmers will make $1 trillion or $1 trillion from the agriculture sector by 2030. We are just 8 years away from that. What is Ghana's conditions to be able to gain even 10%?
Okay.
So we need to start beginning to look at, okay, do data support or the kind of data and the policies we implement support the available situations on the ground? For instance, I chair the Ghana Agriculture Sector Skills Body of TVET Commission. And I'm sure my good friend Kwesi can also attest to that, and Karawe. We import well over 40% of the high skills in all sectors of the agriculture industry. And for me, looking at the skills gap analysis we did, if we are talking about investment into the agriculture sector, any sensible investor will look at what indigenous skills are in the country to obtain the kind of investment I'm bringing and the kind of project we want to do as a country. And this is the beginning of our problems.
Okay. So accurate data availability is a problem.
Certainly.
Okay.
Now, once we begin to look at that, we need to also look at some 4 key areas.
Let's do that snappy because we have
government, first of all,
we have to meet our time with the networks.
From the agriculture industry. Government has no business in importing agriculture machineries. Government has no business in telling suppliers to supply whatever to farmers. Make policies that are available for the private sector to look at the long-term investment strategies to put in the money there.
Okay.
Then the 2 areas. Government must also look at what are the, within the IMF discussions, what are the current or what are the anchoring commodities for which we are to anchor the development of the agriculture sector now. And you see, I don't want to be talking about agriculture. I want to be looking at agro-industry. Because once you identify the market for production, you will always do production. But where is the market? What factory is uptaking the produce? What market is taking the variables that or the varieties of produce you are producing?
That have been produced.
Then finally, we have the Ghana agriculture export strategy that has been developed 4, 5, 8 years ago. Where is that policy?
Okay.
What is the implementation at this point as we speak? So there are kind of a lot of things that are boxed up, and we need to start looking at it. And we should, as a country, stop all these short-term policies, because in the agriculture sector, when you plant, it takes 6 months. Or when you want to go into plantation, it takes more than 5 years to start harvesting. No short-term policy of agriculture sector can help develop or sustain the gains that we have achieved in the past, or to move forward and develop a sustainable growth strategy for the industry.
Okay.
Thank you. We provide premix for the fish industry.
You said government should get out of some of those things. Premix is abused serially. Should government stop it?
Exactly so.
Okay, that's good. Let me acknowledge, we'll get the interactive aspect now, because
same
we are live.
applies to the subsidies. We don't have to implement subsidies.
Okay. Because we're live on air, that's why I'm being strict on the time before we are taking off. So I'm going to come to Mr. Karawa on that, but let me first acknowledge the support that we're getting from Qualiplast Limited, also Specialized Company Limited. We appreciate your support. And as I mentioned earlier, we have organizations including the Ghana Association of Workers Union, the European Union, the German Embassy, the Netherlands Embassy, and we are live on Joy News at the moment. Media partners, TV3, Ghanaian Times, TV Africa, Ghana Web, and Atenka are already here. Mr. Karawe, even though you have a lot of questions why we are getting back to the IMF, we have been told that it's a necessary evil at this point in time. What can we still get out of that, in as much as we are getting there, in your view, at the wrong time, or probably not supposed to even get there in the first place?
Well, my initial view is clear, except that I believe in my professors and I believe in Ghanaians. They are saying that if we don't go to IMF now, there will be a socio-economic meltdown. I'm a Ghanaian. I love my country. I don't want that to happen. If that is the reason why we'll go to IMF, I agree we should go. But then, it is the only reason. Otherwise, there's no way out. I would think that we should go to IMF. Now, the second thing is, you see, we are told that what we need to put in our proposal to IMF and so on, it's a precondition so that we don't get the meltdown. But we must learn how to walk our talk. That is the core of it. We should learn how to walk our talk. When we say something, we should do that. If you take the Planting for Food and Jobs program, the way it is structured, the way we are told, I mean, the policy itself is a good one. I don't think anybody, either IMF, World Bank, or anybody, global organization, will say that it is not a good one. What did we do? We did not implement it to the letter, to the specifics, and we said it. So when we go to IMF and come back and have vetted the socio-economic meltdown, everything depends on us. And I'm saying this because, you see, you can't go to somebody for an advice, and I do agree, IMF does not go to sectorial areas. So it means it is ourselves. What do we do with our sectors? How do we take agriculture? We import fertilizer, we allow it to be smuggled out, and yet we can come and tell everybody that the fertilizer is smuggled out? I mean, how can this happen? Why do you want to blame that? Why do you go to IMF? IMF, if not because of the meltdown, we say IMF, don't entertain them. Because you cannot do this to your own people. And you subsidize it, you allow it to be smuggled out. You sit down, I cross Burkina Faso anytime I want to go. Look, let me tell you, Burkina Faso, everything is not as good as Ghana. Their soil texture, fertility, water, and the rest. Yet they can produce tomatoes and sell to ourselves, to us, over 80%. Why do we do this? And then someone is handling my money. You see, these are some of the things. Because even if we don't want ourselves, we should want our future. Because those people, they don't owe us. We owe them a duty. And I'm saying that because of the preventing the socio-economic meltdown, we can go to IMF. But we should get our government to assemble you people here to sit down and look at how we are going to now manage our economy going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Karawe. So I'm going to go to the audience now because, unfortunately, and thanks to JoyNews, we have an extended time on air. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes more to take positions from our audience, and I'm going to start with quite a number of the institutions that are present. I know and have noticed the presence of the Peasant Farmers Association, also the Importers and Exporters Association. But underlining all these things that we're talking about, whether we like it or not at the moment, and Mr. Karawe has done the needful, accepting the fact that we should be there because he's a Ghanaian. But how will complementary fiscal and monetary reforms under this IMF improve the broader investment climate in this country that we are seeking? I would okay, to begin to work around this, and if we have input, I would be happy to take them. Let me start with the Importers and Exporters Association, Mr. Samson Azaki. Use the microphone in front of you, sir. Not the ones from the TV stations. The one there.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is okay. Mr. Jama, what do you want me to say? Just to thank Imani Ghana for organizing such a program at the right time, and also the professors have spoken. So some of us, what can we say? But the point is, quite clearly, if I were to be the president of the Republic of Ghana, I would resign. Because the president, of course, said, I'm serious. The president said Ghana beyond 8. Is IMF not on 8? If you campaign that Ghana beyond 8, and it's everywhere, globally, it means you have sufficient, you've reached a peak that you will not go to IMF, you will not go to World Bank, you don't need GIZ and others to come and support us in advocacy and others. Ghana is beyond 8. And it has cost us a lot. Talk is cheap in this country. If the Minister of Agric started the program or the government program on planting for food and jobs, at the point I asked the government, how did you implement policy for planting for food and jobs? And it is household, smallhold farmers. Smallhold farmer is just an English word. It's the peasant farmers. That would not take your agric to anywhere. You have something as agric farm to feed my wife and my children. That's peasant farmer. This policy, if really we are serious about planting for food and job creation, we are talking about identifying each region, farmers, commercialized farmers, that you give them, you support them with the needed input and machinery that they need. Someone said government doesn't need to import machinery. Government need to bring, you need to give us a policy, you need to give us the needed machinery, then the private sector can write on it. Then you give the program to only peasant farmers. Then the commercialized farmers are complaining. You said we import a lot. Of course, I'm sure you would say we import rice a lot, tomatoes and other things. But I'm sure if you go to those areas like Burkina Faso and others, we are bringing tomatoes from there because it's a commercialized farming. I'm not sure it's peasant farmers that we go there to buy because it is there in abundance. So until we stop the cheap talk and do the work, if you have a finance minister who spend without regards to fiscal policy and comes to our parliament and say we are not going to IMF, and we have a deputy minister who comes to parliament and says that so far as the MPP remain in power and the President Akufo-Addo is the president of the Republic of Ghana, we are not going to IMF.
Okay.
And they break, and these are the people who are going to IMF.
Okay.
So in principle, we need to resign.
Thank you,
so
Samson.
For me, if you ask me, I can tell you, Importers and Exporters Association, we are ready to support agric and manufacturers. Because at the end of the day, if we produce and we have sufficient to feed ourselves, the surplus, we can look for market. As we speak,
okay.
African Continental Free Trade is here. How many of our manufacturers, or how many, what are the things that we identify as a country that this is our strong area, and we are pushing every Ghanaian to go there, because when it comes to Ghana, so far as African Continental Free Trade area is concerned, we can produce this more and then benefit in the market. We don't have it.
Thank you, Samson.
So this is why we find ourselves.
So important that you landed on the African Continental Free Trade area, because it's also important that we examine the structural impediments to industrialization in Ghana, and when the country was under the IMF and when it's outside the IMF. I would wish that if we can also be able to digest that, compare that, and see how best we can build on it. Because, like Samson said, whether we like it or not, this is a very significant period we are in. We are commencing a continental trading, of which Ghana is more or less leading. And if at this point we are finding ourselves discussing with IMF, what are we looking at? How do we ensure that we are able to stay competitive with our industries and be able to meet and compete with the other countries that are equally going to bring their value-added product into this country? I'll take peasant farmers, and then I'll take Reverend Dr. Nanaya Prempe, who is also leading the Nyokodo Farmers Association, which is a network of about 36,000 farmers, and then we will come back. Yes. Peasant Farmers Association, please.
Okay, thank you very much. My good friend, let me first of all indicate that there is always a wrong impression when we are talking of planting for food and jobs. The impression is that the support is coming to peasant farmers. It's not the case. Okay? The reason why we are where we are today is because peasant farmers are neglected. Because all this conversation, I have investors who are willing to invest in the agriculture sector without any support from government, working with peasant farmers, but because of policies and our cultural norms and traditional rules, those people are not able to do it. My good brother, Doc, is here. If you ask him today, the reason why his investment is not given as much as is expected is because of climate change. Our problem has to do with irrigation. Nobody is talking about that. How will IMF program address the issue of farmers not getting water? Go to most of the areas. There are people who are willing to go there and invest. But they won't do it because this year, many farmers abandoned their farms. We did a program, One Village, One Dam. You go there and those dams cannot even be used for backyard farming. We are not looking at that. IMF is in Ghana. We were expecting that if you are talking about agriculture, at least hear from the farmers. Okay? Mechanization. Look, I organized my groups to approach a Ministry of Food and Agric to take some of the government subsidized tractors that came in. One is 257,000 Ghana cedis. Many farmers are not able to afford. We were willing to pay half and take these increased centers and then provide services for the majority of the farmers who needs it. The ministry is not ready. How will IMF program make it possible for farmers to be able to take credit and invest in these areas and be able to expand their productivities? We are not talking about that. Look, we are talking about bringing tomatoes from Burkina. Look, we have more potential to produce tomatoes. We used to do it. Yeah. The reason why we were doing is that we were promised that Northern Star Tomato Factory was being revamped. In 2008, most of our farmers went to produce tomatoes. At the end of the day, the factory couldn't consume. So farmers have to commit suicide. So what we need to do is to advise IMF team on areas that we think when invest. We don't need subsidies. People are talking about supporting farmers. We are not getting anything. Okay? We are just talking about creating enabling environment for investors to invest. Now let me conclude with this last comment. Those investors I'm talking about are looking for lands without any litigation, they are willing to develop the place, recruit farmers to go in and invest and supply raw materials to their industries. The challenges they are facing, they have to leave the country. These are domestic policies that we need to do. So to me, I think until all of us come together and do our self-assessment,
okay,
we will never make any progress with IMF program.
Dr. Nanaya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ajiman. Yeah, so my name is Reverend Dr. Nanaya Prempe, and I'm here for two things, especially because I heard two things, agriculture and money. I'm here because there is a network of 36,000 farmers around this nation. Majority of them are women, and that's why I'm passionate about it. They are planting, they are harvesting, and they are crying because a lot of their crops are going bad. They have no one to help them. I have an IT background, so what I'm doing now is creating an online presence for some of them so they can be able to showcase their products. They need little monies. These women need little monies, 5,000, 2,000. And they also need machinery. They need machinery that will help them to plow. Thank you. So I am crying out for help for these farmers. They are spread around the nation. Majority of them are in the central region, and they consist of crop farming, animal farming, name it. They have it. Cassava. They have lots of things. So please, if anyone is listening or watching, and you can support these farmers, please come to their aid. The Yonkodo Farmers Association. And today happens to be the birthday of the president. Happy birthday, Mama Rebecca. Please, we need help. So if there is any institution that can give them support, they are willing to pay you every condition that you give them.
Okay.
Yonkodo Farmers Association. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Franklin.
Thank you. So we are going to invite anyone else. Do we have any question from the audience? Any hands? Yes, that and that. So I have two questions. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Questions or comments, it can be.
Comments and questions.
Yes. And briefly, though,
yes,
it has to be about 30 seconds because
thank
we're
you
running
very
out
much.
of time. Thank you.
The first comment I want to make is that, in fact, when you sit here and listen to all the conversation from professors, academia, within the agric sector, it's very interesting. And you wonder why we are so battering with issues of commodities that we are exporting from other countries like frozen fruits and all that. The question is, I want to ask the gentleman Anthony, he made mention that skills labor, the kind of skills that we need in this country in terms of agric sector is not all that enough. I want to find out from him what kind of skills these Burkinabes are having that we Ghanaians, that we are born and bred, we have all these resources here in terms of our land is basically an agrarian, let's say, sector.
Okay.
That we don't have.
Okay. Any other question or contribution? Briefly, 30 seconds. Yes, sir. Yes, you have it. Kindly step forward and use any of the microphones ahead of you. Yeah.
Okay. The prof asked the question that why we fail to act. And I worked as a civil servant, so I was from my contribution.
Okay.
My observation was, you see, you can make a policy statement, but it has to translate it into plans, active structure, activities and strategy. How you do it? How much will it cost? Who will do that? The point is that I'm not too sure that capacity is so readily available in the public service. Breaking it down, the devil is in the details. And how much will it cost? Who will get the money? Who's monitoring it? Because some of us left because... and sometimes when you try and insist, it is resisted. So if we need to go back and look at ourselves again, how do we plan how much, break down the details. When we do that, we shall be in a better position to implement even our own policies. And when you are looking down, you realize that some of them are not, sometimes it comes from the planning stage. And even the planning, the stakeholders. Okay. So those are the kind of things we need to observe too. Thank you very much.
Okay. The next one. Yes, the gentleman there.
Right, so I have a question. Mine is a question, and I would wish Professor Bobkin could help me with that. So my question is that how much of IMF's investment in the last 5 years had been allocated to agric and manufacturing? And as well, what have been the growth rate in those 5 years investment? And finally, which subsector of agric drove the entire growth within the last 5 years?
Okay, I take another last question before I come to Dr. Abu Zakara and then Mr. Kubo. Yes.
Yes. What I want to add, because the panelists mentioned data, it's very important. But one, what are the packages we are sending to IMF? I remember when we were doing the what you mentioned, ACPE. We want to see the performance of agriculture based on CADEP. One issue was definition of agriculture. So at a point, we have to use COFOG and COFOG Plus. So even definition of agriculture is not clear. So the basis by which we are going is wrong. And the report also indicated that there were issues with allocative inefficiencies because most of the allocations went to, instead of going to irrigation and infrastructure, it went to subsidy. And there were also issues where we were even adding as one of the indicators, debt service. How can debt service improve agriculture? Expenditure in debt service. It cannot. And at the point we were adding cocoa.
Okay.
Cocoa is not a budgetary, doesn't take budget, they get their own funds.
Okay.
So we need to package, know what we are sending, a package we are sending for agriculture to the IMF.
Okay.
To be successful.
Okay. The gentleman in glasses, I saw a hand up there, so that I take that last one before Dr. Abu Zakara.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mine just a harmless question. Prof, maybe to you and a few of your colleagues, have you got an indication that a consensus is going to be built, like the Senchi census we had, in advancing our homegrown program for this IMF's approval?
Okay.
The markets believe is delaying a bit, and it looks as though we are waiting for life to happen to us. Have you picked up any signals in that regard? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Abu Zakara, so we're having post-harvest losses. We are importing from places that people think that we should have better capacity to produce much more than them. We are struggling to meet our industry's demands, and then industries are even struggling to supply and meeting their own demands. Where are we, and what proposal, drilling down to agriculture, what should we expect the impact of this IMF to have on agriculture?
Thank you. I'll deal with that one issue first, which I think summarizes the issue of expenditure and revenue. IMF is concerned about expenditure and revenue. In that box called expenditure, what are you going to do to reduce your expenditure? And in that box called revenue, what are you going to do to increase your revenue? Part of that is what we're talking about on the agriculture side. But controlling these two boxes, of course, is our politics. When you have a short-term tenure of government, which is based on campaign promises, definitely, as much as you refuse to do it, it will happen. So we have to look at the bigger picture and examine even what kind of democracy we have and what tenures of office, maybe longer term, so that we have about 5-6 years for development, instead of having 2 years either side and only 2 years for actual development. That's
Okay.
one thing. Inside that box, the things you're going to do to increase production must be anchored on irrigation. The question that we keep talking about Burkina is, look at the irrigated land in Burkina and look at the irrigated land in Ghana. They have much more irrigated land than us, and that is why 6 months of the year, they're not sitting down doing nothing. Half the country, 6 months of the year, is sitting down doing nothing.
Yeah.
And they have 4 rivers that flow through it: Dakar, Black Volta, White Volta, Oti. You couldn't space them better. If we use those rivers during the 6 months that we did nothing, we can easily add another 25% on our GDP. if we anchor our strategy of going to the IMF on that productivity growth,
okay,
then we will have a solution, we will have a way out. If we don't, then we'll keep going back there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Busakara. Let me just, on behalf of GIZ and IMANI, say a big thank you to JoyNews for covering this live for everybody across the entire country to watch. I'm going to go to Mr. Kubo in case I did that acknowledgement, in case we go off air, which we're going to, I think it's due in about 2 or 3 or 5 minutes maximum. Mr. Kubo.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a challenge when you have to have these detailed discussions in 2 hours because we don't do justice to it.
Yeah.
Agriculture alone is a big issue. Manufacturing is a big issue. May I suggest that we, not necessarily in the face of media, but we have a more detailed conversation. And I think that we can then digest and come out with a plan, like you said, that says that what do we have to do? Because some of us are of the position that policy need not mean money investments. Some of us are of that clear position. And if you look at agricultural transformation in other places, it's so. Also, even where money is required, it's what kind of investments do you want to make? And how efficient are those investments? You know, agricultural value chains are not financed using just one node, whether it's production. It has to be the whole value chain. It's like a water hose. If the hose perforated, once you open a tap, water leaks all over the place. So I hope and I'm praying that we can have some time, and I think it's not too late. So we can have a more robust discussion on finance or agriculture, policy regulations, government investments, what role private sector plays, what is it that we want to do, which crops do we prioritize, and how do we align it with existing World Bank programs and other from donors, whether it's Netherlands Embassy, GIS, whatever. So we have a comprehensive program.
Yeah.
The challenge is that sometimes, we've had policies, but when you read through it, it's not reflected. There's not enough consultation with those who are actually playing the role of the players in the sector.
Okay.
So you speak to the players and they are not conversant, or it doesn't even address that problem. Policy is meant to address problems.
Okay.
A policy misdirected, there's no policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kubo. So I think the entire table agrees that there's a need for a comprehensive engagement on this, papers on the table, positions on the table from every corner so that we can have a fruitful presentation also. Let me say thank you once again to Joy News. I'm told that in about 30 seconds we should be off, but we're going to hear from our distinguished panelists before we leave. So whether we are live or not, and I am told that quite a number of the other media outlets are also covering live, so if we go off the other, we may be on the other. Professor Bob King, you may have to take the first one as we end this last round.
Okay, thank you very much. There's one thing that is clear to me, having listened to the conversation from the table, that the country needs some kind of a national consensus building around the IMF.